Good morning. My name is Kanute Rarey. I was rustling around in a box this morning looking at some old things from my childhood, and I found an old tin cup, rusted and chipped. It reminded me of my grandfather, my grandpa Schweitzer. My grandpa Schweitzer raised us on a farm in Ohio after my mom died. I went to live with him when I was 6 years old. My brother Fred was 8. My younger brother Ike was 4. We went to live with him, and my grandma Schweitzer, my Aunt Arlene still lived at home, and my Uncle John. And Grandpa taught us so many things that I didn't realize, taught us by examples of life. And he made sacrifices I was still discovering today. All of that came about thinking about that from this old milk cup with its stains. One of the things he taught us was hard work. We had cows and pigs and chickens and goats, and we milked the cows and slopped the pigs and collected eggs from the chickens, sheared the sheep. He taught us about life and work as we raised crops on the farm. We raised oats and corn and soybeans and hay for alfalfa. We took care of the animals, and we took care of the growing the crops and harvesting the crops. And Grandpa was always there, right there, working by our sides. Taught us hard work. Taught us about the fact that sometimes you just don't want to give up, because Grandpa really didn't want to give up as he got older, and he had to be sitting in that chair, and we had to take over the farming, and he had to be sitting in the chair in the house. He wanted to be out in that barnyard again, in the fields and the barn and the woods and the barnyard, but he just couldn't be there, even though he loved it so much. He taught us how to drive. As my brothers each got older, Fred first, and then me, and then my brother Ike, he let us drive that old Dodge car. We would practice by driving around in the fields. And then he would let us drive him home. He would feign that he was too tired and could we please drive, way before we got our license. Then he would let us drive the back roads, and finally we would get our license. But he taught me a valuable lesson on one wintry day. It was a icy, snowy, wintry road, and there was snow in every ditch. We were driving to town, and as we were driving to town, a little rabbit ran out in front of me, and I was driving a 1955 Pontiac, this old Pontiac of my grandfather's. I swerved to miss the rabbit, and we both all slid into the ditch, Grandpa and myself in the car, deep in the snow. And after 4 hours of my brother, waiting on my brother, actually calling my brother at a local phone, at a neighbor's phone, because there were no cell phones, and waiting for him to drive the tractor down there and pulling us out of the ditch. And my grandpa really taught me the lesson, you never swerve for animals if at all possible. Also, my grandpa taught us the value of money. And we didn't get an allowance. We got what we called milk money. The milk money came from milking cows and selling the milk to a dairy and getting a check each week from the dairy. And we got half of the check. Grandpa divided it between us. No allowance. We had a milk check. We took our half. Each of us got a third, Fred and Ike and I. We got our half, and Grandpa took us to town, and we would put our half in the bank, just to teach us about the value of money and saving money. Well, Grandpa also, he had a personal life, like we all have. He was 64 years old when I was 6 years old and went to live with him. And he had a long life before that. But I just knew him as Grandpa, and I just knew him as that farmer that lived on the farm. But we would go to town with my grandmother and my Aunt Arlene, and people would come up and, of course, talk about the day. And at the end of the time, they would often, most of the time, say, "How's Andy? How's Andy?" And I thought, how's Andy? Andy was my grandpa, and we only called him Andy at home. And he only went to funerals and to the feed mill, so how did these people know him? Well, later on and over time in life, I found out that he was a town constable before he was my grandfather. And he was a auctioneer and auctioned items off at big sales. And he was a dance caller. He called square dances with a local musical group. That was my grandpa. That was his life. He'd had that personal life that we discovered over time. And he had a private life, too. He had a private life, and part of that private life was that he drank too much. He drank too much for a lot of years because we found a lot of spider web covered, dusty covered bottles, little bottles, whiskey bottles that in the barns, on the sills in the barns, and on the corners in the dirt. We never asked about it, and we never even thought about it. But it turned out that later we found out that my mother had gone to my grandfather, and my grandfather had been drinking and drinking too much, and she said to my grandfather that if he didn't stop drinking, he wasn't going to be able to see us boys. And this was way before my mother died, after we were born. But Grandpa said, yes, I'll quit. And he quit that day. And he never drank again, and I never saw him take a drink, and I never saw alcohol in our home with him as we were raised. That was Grandpa's commitment to us. That was another sacrifice Grandpa made. One of many we don't know. And of the life experiences that he gave us and we learned from, the lessons he learned from, that was our Grandpa Schweitzer. And that was the sacrifice and the lessons he provided us in our lives that we're still learning about today. Thank you.